Greetings. You've read the title, I'm just going to go straight to the point. This part is to show you what these overpowered abilities I'm not allowed to use are. First is Time Freeze, freezes all enemies for 20 seconds. Obviously ridiculous. That's just not very balanced at all, and it's part of why this mission is realistically doable for a lot of people. The next one is Shield, which just gives 200 shield to every unit, yours and your allies. Again, very powerful. And this one is a laser beam that you can direct 3 times in up to 3 different directions. And most notably, it instantly kills one of the Voidal Hands. I'll explain that in a bit. There are also 2 passives, which I cannot disable. One is a warp module that lets me warp in units quicker, and the other is passive regeneration on a certain amount of units, which is incredibly powerful and instrumental to the challenge. Now, as we go through the boring beginning bit that's really easy, I'm going to go over the rules. So, I cannot abuse save and reload. Of course, you could save and reload 1,000 times, and that would solve every problem and trivialize the challenge for the most part. I do have a save, skipping over this early bit, which I'm only going to show you once, because it's boring and doesn't challenge me at all. I will make many anti-crash saves, and that is to stop any glitches or crashes that mess with the integrity of a challenge. So for example, if something really goes well for me and it's a glitch, I will reload, or if something really bad happens, like my entire base gets deleted with no enemy interaction, then that would also be worthy of a reload. I cannot use Spear of ADUN active abilities. The passives, again, I can influence, so they are just there. If I misclick an active Spear of ADUN power, I can reload my anti-crash save, provided that doesn't give me an unfair advantage. So if I've misclicked a Spear of ADUN ability but I've lost half my base, and my reload would make me not lose half my base, that would be an unfair advantage and I'd have to class that as a failure. No glitch abuse. For example, if a Void Thrasher somehow got stuck, I would have to find a way to free it, or reload the anti-crash save. And essentially, I'm going to make sure the mission plays as intended. Now, something that makes this mission incredibly challenging, and doubly so in this challenge run I'm doing, essentially, is whilst you have these overpowered abilities, your resources are hyper limited. You do not have much money, and you can barely scrape together an army off your starting area, and the later areas are very hard to safely farm and get money and resources from. In addition, you have your 2 allied bases which must survive. If either of them gets destroyed, you lose the mission, and so defending is of vast importance. These Void Thrashers are the main point of failure because they are very powerful and they spawn units. And I don't have powers to deal with them, so I have to manually destroy these dudes that spawn infinite other dudes. And I said I'd speak about the Voidal Hands, which they're called Void Rifts, but they look like hands, so I'm calling them hands. They also spawn infinite dudes, essentially. They have a certain cap, and they would keep on spawning them, and these units will also march down the lanes, I'll call them, towards you and your allies. And so this means that the enemy has a lot of free stuff, and that's very hard to deal with. So I have limited money, and there are infinite enemies. That makes this very difficult without broken powers. So the name of this game, as you can probably tell from the thumbnail, is Mission Attrition. Your 2 allies, the Terrans and the Zerg, have infinite resources. They don't actually use resources. So as long as they don't die, any number of deaths does not matter. They are my shield. I'm going to use them as fodder, and every loss that I take is permanent and huge. Now, usually a great way of dealing with the Void Hands is to use the lasers in order to destroy them. 3 lasers does instantly kill a Void Hand, and so you can play a game of defend, scout out a Void Hand, blow it up, and then you can make some permanent progress. Obviously, providing 200 shield or stopping time would be very powerful, and the last power to spawn a pylon isn't very good for its cost, but it would be useful in this challenge because it would save me money on having to build them. So I have to manually destroy each and every void hand and the void crystals. I'm not sure what they're actually called, corruption crystals I think. I'll call them void crystals. Those provide this damaging aura that will slowly, actually it's not even slow, it's quite quick actually, that will quickly damage everything of yours or your allies in the area. And when you destroy them, that gets taken away, and of course you then get some vision in that area, which is massive, and one of my strategies going forward will be to get vision in key spots so I can react in time. The start of the mission is actually relatively easy. It's when you start pushing out that you have this issue of getting overwhelmed and caught out in places, and I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not good at Starcraft 2. I play it hyper casually, I just happen to love some of the missions, this is one of my favourites, and I'm very okay at RTS in general. I'm not good, but I can use control groups, I can do basic micro, I know how to build a base, I know basic theory behind stuff, how you don't want to lose units and unit preservation, but I'm not good, and I don't pretend to be good. I can only beat certain missions on Brutal. So that makes this incredibly tricky for me. So, what happens on this mission is these Void Thrashers will spawn every so often, and one will march towards the Terran base, and then it will switch to the Zerg, and then it will switch back to the Terrans, and then back to the Zerg ad infinitum. So dealing with that is going to be the hard part. However, a Void Thrasher doesn't come to your base, usually. Sometimes it gets weirdly aggroed and it can end up at your base, but the intent is that it goes to your two allied bases. Now, because I'm not great at micro, I am using these two Annihilators, which are very powerful units, and just making sure I don't lose units, because resources are so limited. I cannot overstate how limited they are, and as we get later on into the challenge, you will see how limited resources truly are. So I'm doing my best to not lose these Immortals, I believe they're called. I forget what they're called. But I don't want to lose them. They have a powerful active, which does big damage at a long range, which for the early game is primarily how I'm going to be sniping Void Thrashers and destroying Void Hands. Okay, I've sped up the footage, and now I'm going to be commenting on the little things I do and why I do them. So, I'm building up defences, because you do get attacked on the left flank every now and then, and there are some fairly powerful attack waves that come in. In addition, with the right amount of turrets in the middle, it is nearly impossible for the Terrans to fall. I am going to focus on pushing up on the Zerg side, because once you push up far enough on any of the first two lanes of your allies, you will gain an outpost for them and they will start producing units. However, on the Zerg side, you cannot build on the creep, on their black sludge, and so I can't do that, and that's why I'm going to focus more on pushing up on their side, and that creates a much bigger buffer to deal with the Thrashers that are going to be coming in, whereas the Terrans, I'm going to use defences to defend them, funnily enough. On the left side, there are bases you can spawn, but an important thing to note that is some of the outposts can actually be permanently destroyed. The 4 marked ones, actually, can be permanently destroyed if they lose their command core or their hatchery or their capital, I'll call it. And so I'm actually deliberately not going to push too far up on the left side, because that creates more points for me to defend, thus splitting up units and thus creating more instances and opportunities for me to mess up and lose a unit. And since I'm not abusing save reload, that makes this necessary, because mistakes are permanent and painful. So the lanes, I'll call them, the middle and the right lane, the Terran and the Zerg lanes, after you've pushed up a decent amount, you will gain a mini outpost which can permanently regrow. They will keep permanently rebuilding there, and so it just acts as a bonus buffer and extra units. And whilst that doesn't solve the problem for you, it is more stuff. And I'm not going to complain at having more stuff to yeet at the opponents. So I'm continuing to macro, and I've very deliberately not built too many workers, because I'm actually going to have workers idle for a very, very long time. Now, I missed micro there, lost the Annihilator, rip, but you could see I was aiming to snipe the Void Hand, and yeah, I lost a unit for it. A big part of the strategy is to kite enemy groups into your allies so that they can kill them, and then when the next wave or the Void or Thrasher arrives, you will have less stuff to deal with at once, which helps you not get overwhelmed. I build another Annihilator, and I'm trying to limit the enemy forces while still chipping down the Void Thrasher, and the Zerg are already in trouble. You can see just how quickly things can go south, and my dudes are getting injured. I'm trying to benefit off the region, and that's it. I basically just die. Yeah, I messed up. I didn't have enough stuff. Dead, just like that. It's rough. This marks the first failure. I knew it was likely going to happen, but I didn't think that's how it was going to happen. I hadn't actually made my save yet at this point, but so I guess we're going to watch this boring bit again, but I'm going to use this opportunity to explain what I'm going to do differently. I'm going to have an extra force that I'm going to use specifically to prevent from happening what just happened, where I'm way underprepared, a Void Thrasher comes in with a wave of enemies, and yeah, this is where I make the save as well, just to get past that first bit, because I'm not going to do that every time. There's no need. It's boring. It doesn't do anything. But I'm going to have a mobile force to prevent me from just dying. I knew it was going to happen, though. I'm not surprised in the slightest that I failed. Just, I'm surprised at how I failed, if that makes sense. So that's another thing that can go wrong. Not just running out of resources, but getting caught out for just one moment and boom. Mission failed. Now, you saw there that I pulled some enemies in, so that it was just the Void Thrasher. The first one really isn't that much of a threat because the enemy waves haven't started coming in yet, and it's there. I mean, this is clearly here to show you how the mission functions. It's like, hey, this is this really absurdly powerful thing, you better take this seriously. And then, of course, the mission gets more challenging as it goes. Now, when you clear enough of the map, your allies do actually take care of themselves for the most part, and eventually the waves of enemies will get intercepted by your ally that isn't being attacked. So for example, if the Terrans are being attacked by a Thrasher and you control 85% of the map, I'm just spitting out numbers, then some of the enemies will be intercepted by the Zerg waves and thus relieving the pressure from the Terrans, and that helps a lot. But I'm not going to play most of it at that point. Most of it I'm going to spend with the map mostly dark, as you can tell. So I'm repeating the same strategy, but with more stuff, essentially. I'm going to be just building more stuff. Now, as I said before, I'm going to have idle workers for a long time, so I'm not going to have many workers, because there's no point maxing out on workers if they're going to be idle for over half the mission. That just doesn't make sense. I'd rather have the money for extra troops. And it's so easy to get caught out, I just cannot explain to you how much that is to think about. The footage is at 2x speed, but even at half speed right now, it's still pretty damn fast, especially for a non-pro like me, and there's just more enemies, more dudes, more crap in the way. Now, something I should cover is, you might think, can you not just mass air, go around the outside and just insta-kill the big bad guy? No. Around the very edges of the map, there's a bunch of flying units that are very, very powerful, and that's just not practical. You could probably do it with the powers. I'm sure there's a way to do this in like 12 minutes or something with the powers, but I don't have the powers, and as you can tell, I'm not going to win many man fights. So, yeah, that's not really a valid option. So, you see I'm dropping the fleet beacon. I'm going to get carriers. Carriers are, of course, an excellent unit, and they're doubly so against AI, because the bots will often waste shots on the little drones, the interceptors, and that essentially adds health to my units by virtue of them not being shot. And when they're not shot, they're not dying. Big brain stuff, I know. Very big brain stuff. So I'm going to continue. I've actually got 4 Annihilators this time, which I'm hoping should prevent the Void Thrasher from just crushing me. And right now I'm kiting the enemies back and making space, and actually that will sometimes, as you saw just there, make your allies aggro forward, and that can help you to push up even more. The mission goes from like very, very easy at the very start to quite hard. You see here I just lose a turret, bam, because I wasn't prepared there. And when I've played this mission in the past, I've always used the powers. So these instances where I'm caught out, I can usually solve by just, I'm just going to Solar Lance this, I'll just Time Stop, I'll just give everything a 200 shield barrier, and that bails me out. But I have no such luxury, and now I'm learning I have to actually accommodate for these weak spots because I don't have this crutch. It's not really a crutch, if I'm honest, because the mission is so dang hard, and the powers are there to balance it. But I would say this mission is too hard, even on Brutal, honestly, even with the powers. It could do with a minor nerf, but it is a lot of fun. So, I'm going to call it a crutch anyway, but without the crutch I have to be very on top of where I allocate my resources. And you don't have that many to start, and it's now in the sort of medium to hard difficulty relative to the rest of the map. Because the waves are coming in and I control no ground, but there's not that many different points to defend. There's 3. I lose another turret. This is just me not having enough crap, bluntly. Trying to max out on turrets, and I think I've already botched this at this point. Yeah. But Carrier has arrived, so, you know, Carrier has arrived, Carrier can do it. I lose another dude. It's so hard to destroy these Void Rifts, because I can kill 50,000 of the creatures that spawn from them. I get nowhere. They'll just keep on coming back, so you have to destroy the hands. You have to. They will not only spawn waves, but they have their own guard troop that has a cap, and so you need to make permanent progress, or you're just going to end up fighting waves of garbage for all of existence and all of eternity. And so I have to take risks to try and snipe these things, and every loss is permanent. And I suppose right now you still can't see the economical constraints I'm under, but you will. I promise you that, you will. I managed to get a few hits there. I think it takes 4 Annihilator actives to destroy a hand fully, which is pretty easy. So that's a Void Corruption Crystal. This is damaging all the stuff, and now it's gone. You will see that I have vision there now, and me and my allies are no longer taking damage. It's damage to the tune of about 2.5 a second, give or take. I've never counted it, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when there's 10, 20, 30, 40 units in the area, yeah, that's a lot of damage per second. And it's really nice to not have to deal with that, both for me and my allies. And obviously that hurts more when your army is wide, because it affects each unit indiscriminately, and so the more chunky big units you have, and thus more dense, the less you're going to be affected by it. But it's still painful, and honestly that's probably the only reason why you're given the passive region in this mission, to deal with the corruption, because it's nasty. However, you can see now that this is one of those mini outposts I mentioned. The Terrans will permanently rebuild this one as long as they don't die, because if they die I lose, of course. So it's an extra buffer, which is good, but sometimes it's harmful because it's not a powerful buffer, and so sometimes it allows the enemy units to congeal and group up and then become a wrecking ball of doom, which is why how I'm playing this is I'm trying to keep the numbers down to stop them from reaching this critical mass that just overruns you like a tide of filth. And it works. So I snipe another Void Thrasher, and yeah, I'm working on carriers, which are going to be very good. Of course. Now, you might think, could you not build turrets here? But there's a problem with that. The enemy waves are coming in constantly, so it'd be very difficult to preserve turrets here before it gets creeped later. And also, it's in range of the corruption quite often, and so it's just going to die or take up region more than anything else. The regen applies to up to 3 units and heals buildings for 10 a second instead of 5, but you really need that regen in a lot of these fights, and yeah, you don't want it to be on your buildings if at all possible, of course. So there's probably a way to do it. I never found it reliably. I never really tried that much though. And there is an awkward spot where, slightly to the left of where the camera is currently aimed, where if you build turrets there to try and cover both ways, it'll aggro a Void Thrasher, and your allies will not actively seek the Void Thrasher. It's kind of like a MOBA, where your allies will just march up their lanes, unless aggroed. And so, yeah, that's not really viable, because you just end up losing stuff and you run out of money. I'm dealing with another Void Thrasher, and progress is so slow! Maybe I'm being overly cautious, you might think, but trust me, you will see there is not much money. I reckon if you were optimal with your money, you could probably just about make a 200 pop army. Just about, off your starting area, and that's it. I messed up again. I had a bunch of Annihilators, and I still lost nearly everything. I do salvage the Zerg when they're not dead, and they will rebuild, but yeah, that was close. I had to bring over my carriers to do that, and I lost a bunch of resources to Miss Micro. Now, I can start using carriers to push, essentially, but they're so bulky, and yet they're not. The enemies just hit so hard, they have upgrades, there's so many of them, and I'm just trying to kite around to whittle away at these units that will just keep respawning. That's the problem. I'm not getting anywhere permanently. It's so awkward. But with each hand that dies, there is a small group of units you can permanently remove from the area, and that's what's allowing me to kill this Void Crystal, which now I'm free from this corruption damage per second. That saves me with 5 carriers. It saves me somewhere in the realm of 10 to 15 health per second, and that's quite a lot. Of course, I now need to deal with this Thrasher because I don't trust in the turrets alone if there's a death ball coming, and there is, it turns out. That's a lot of stuff. Now, carriers, fortunately, there is a trick you can do where you can sort of make the interceptors start shooting stuff and move the carriers back while they're still doing damage, and so that's really good. Obviously, you're not dying and they're dying, that's great. But I get attacked at the same time, and this is the problem. I'm dealing with one problem, but my base is dying. How do I defend everything without 10 billion turrets? And you might say, build 10 billion turrets. The money isn't there! It's just not... Excuse me. The money just is not there. So this is the point at where I decide I'm going to get some vision going from killing these Void Crystals, and thus I will at least have a little bit more warning before my base gets assaulted by garbage, and thus I can move this elite squadron of carriers around. And this is a good idea. It's not too hard to push up the left side. It's actually probably the easiest side to push up, but it comes with the least reward, because your allies don't make outposts there, only if you take the main marked areas, and then those are vulnerable to attack. And like I said, if the capital of that area falls, the units will no longer spawn for you, and you essentially lose a permanent push of dudes, and that might actually make it impossible to push in the end, because no powers. So yeah, the left side is, other than vision, just no value to pushing. The vision is the only thing. And yeah, it's really rough. But with the extra warning, I will now be in a better position to defend. And as you can see, I'm out of minerals now. I cannot harvest more minerals, pretty much. I think there's only a couple of clusters left. And yes, I've lost some stuff, but that's not a lot of resources left over. You might think like 20 carriers or something would do the trick, and that does help. But you can't just walk somewhere with an army of 20 carriers and win, because you just get backstabbed somewhere else, usually your base. It might be valid to push entirely up the left-hand side first, but you're so far up, and then you have to travel so far across terrain that probably has 1,000 dudes to get back to defending your allies, that's just not the most practical of things. However, I find a good opportunity to push down a couple more Void Hands. That's great, that's less garbage. And of course then the Void Crystal will fall shortly thereafter. Now I have vision of this area, now we don't take corruption damage, and because that's in the middle lane, soon the Terrans will start building another outpost. There's different triggers for different outposts, but usually the rule of thumb is you need to remove all of the perma-spawning enemies, so they're Void Hand caps, and there's some pre-placed enemies as well in some areas that aren't associated with Void Hands or whatever, they're just kind of there, and the Void Crystal. That's usually what you need to make your allies build a new outpost. Now, this is going to be an instance where one of the forward outposts are not as useful as one would think. They are useful, but sometimes, because they're further up and they're usually less strong than the actual base area, you end up in a situation where the enemies can sort of ball up because they get caught on that outpost, and then it just becomes a big death ball that becomes very overwhelming. So I'm just stalling with the carriers in order to not have that happen. But the outposts do come back very quickly, and they just seem to keep rebuilding them regardless of if it's sensible or not, which doesn't matter because they have infinite money anyway, so it works as a nice distraction, more face tanking and what have you. I almost lose a carrier. That might not sound like a big deal, but it is. They cost a lot of Vespene gas. You require more Vespene gas. You require more Vespene gas. Yeah, but I didn't, and that's really nice. So I'm going to try and make another push on the Zerg side, and the Zerg side is the one that really needs to be pushed. You can't build on their, I was going to call it Blight then, but that's Warcraft 3, on their creep, and that's why I'm pushing up on their side. When you do get the opportunity to attack, it can go very smoothly, and then sometimes you just, you know, get ganked by a bunch of dudes. Now, this is crippling. This is utterly crippling. I forgot about the Vipers, and yeah, all of my stuff just gets pulled in and rip. I just lose a bunch of carriers. Boom. One micro mistake. Not even a micro mistake, I just forgot that they were there. Couldn't escape, they got pulled in. Dead. Rip. Gonzo. Absolutely died. Ruined. And that's a crippling blow, because as with any RTS, when you have enough of a unit, you reach a critical mass, and at that point, you can kill things very quickly and limit the DPS fast. When you have less units, you can't do that as reliably, of course. And so now I'm operating on a mere 3 carriers, which is still powerful, but it hurts, and I lost a lot of stuff to those Vipers, Vipers, and I'm out of minerals. I'm out of minerals. I didn't lose that much on this attempt until the Vipers, of course. And I'm out of minerals. What can I do? I lost another carrier, which, skill issue, definitely, I made a mistake. You can use the terrain to kite things around, but I lost another carrier, and yeah, I just played the last 2 minutes of this footage underwhelmingly to outright poorly, and there's no real excuse. Definitely a skill issue moment. And at this point, I'm not sure how I'm going to do anything, because this is the threat. It's not like it's easy to stay alive. It's very difficult to make progress on the map whilst staying alive. One or the other is easy. Both at the same time, that's a whole other story. And I can't lose much more units, and I'm going to tell you now, Sentinels, the little melee dudes, are not going to be enough to push through all this. Not least of which because they're melee, so they can't abuse the terrain like flying units can. One big upside of carriers, which is one of the reasons why I've chose it for my main unit in the mobile backbone force, shall we say, is they do have these repair drones with them, and not only do they repair the carriers themselves, obviously, but they also repair allied mechanicals and buildings. One caveat to your allies is, in the instance of the Terrans, they will not repair their stuff to full. They have the auto repair stuff. I forget what it's called. It's one of the upgrades you can get in their campaign, and it heals them to half. And they don't seem to repair beyond that all the time. if at all. And carriers do fix that, so they kind of add extra survivability and endurance to your allies that are acting as meat shields, bluntly. That's what I'm using them as, just meat shields. And that's another reason why I've chosen carriers. They have fairly good range, they can shoot while retreating, they can heal themselves to combo nicely with the Spear of ADUN healing, the passive healing, and they'll repair your allies' stuff and help you with extra bulky outposts, shall we say, extra buffer. And yeah, I'm trying to just do things with these carriers, and it might look like this is going pretty well. Yeah, I lost a bunch of units, but you know, I'm doing okay. The problem is I'm still nowhere near getting more resources, and I do a silly. I go for that Void Hand, and yep, a carrier gets pulled in. That's another dead carrier. Oh, another carrier gets pulled in. Oh, yoink, 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 bliam, 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 Yoshi tongue, bliam. Just getting pulled in. Fortunately, I didn't lose more, actually. I feel like I should have been punished a lot harder than I was there. But another loss. And I'm trying to kite all this stuff away from the Zerg, because their army isn't big. Now, I have taken over this area, so now this area will spawn Mutalisks, but I fucked up. I led the enemies to their base, and now that hatchery will not be remade. Ever. I just cost myself permanent Mutalisk support. And one huge advantage of Mutalisks is they do have bouncing shots. Your allies will not prioritize the Void Hands and stuff, but the Mutalisk's bounces can hit the Void Hands and the Void Crystals, and they can actually do some nice chip damage. And yeah, I messed up utterly horribly here. I cost myself a hatchery, I let them build a death ball, and I died. Thus marks the second failure in a very similar manner to before. And that was sad. Very sad. After that attempt went awry, I took a break, and we are now on the following day, where I decided to attempt again. And now I'm going to jump around a bit. I'm not going to make you watch the same start. You've already seen the start, you kind of know how it goes at this point. So we're going to jump ahead to some key moments. And I do make a small change to my strategy. So I jump forward here, and you can see that I'm going to make some pushes, but something I'm actually going to do is I'm going to push up the left-hand side a bit sooner this time, purely so I can start reacting to things a bit easier. So I'll very quickly get my carriers going, and I will actually push through on the left-hand side. And that's going to give me more warning sooner, and I'll hopefully lose less stuff en route, essentially. I am still building the Cadarrims, I don't even know how you pronounce it, the big beamy turrets, I'm sure we can all agree on that name, to defend me, but only a few this time. And this time, I get the one carrier, and I'm going to poke down the rubbish, and I'm going to clear out this initial area and just get me that bit of vision. That extra bit of warning makes a world of difference, especially early on when you don't actually have to travel that far. In those extra 10 seconds of warning, maybe 15, depending on what the wave is, gives me enough time to react and lose a lot less stuff. When the map gets bigger, I'll need to push up more for more warning, because obviously the troops I do have will have to move further. And if they have to move further, then naturally I'll need more time. This time, when I take the Mutalisk hatchery, I will not get caught by the Vipers, and I will not lose a bunch of carriers to those. That's already infinitely better than the previous attempt. As I mentioned before, the Mutalisks can and will very slowly and occasionally chip down the Void Hands with their bouncers. The enemies, your allies do hit them, but they don't prioritize them. They'll always prioritize the units, it seems. And so the Mutalisks are one of the very few units that can actually damage the Void Hands, even when there's enemies around. And so this area will eventually be solved naturally, just next to where the Mutalisk hatchery has spawned. And so I don't actually need to worry about that too much. However, I do have an Annihilator there, and there is a reason for it. Their active, which shoots a bunch of bolts, is not reliant on terrain. And if you notice that, it actually goes over the cliff. I'm going to replay that bit in slow motion just so you can see that. See how the bolts fly over the cliff? They go forward, just yoink up it, and whoomp, just curve. And that's just to get rid of it quickly, but it looks funny. The next two big things I achieve are I take down the Void Hand on the right side near the Mutalisk Hatchery, which is nice. Doesn't really solve the mission or anything, but it is nice. It means the Mutalisks will now be able to push a bit harder, and I push up even further on the left hand side for the vision. You can see I'm not even interested in the Void Hands at this point, really. I'll take them, but it's the vision I want, so I can just react to these pushes that come on my base. And this area works quite nicely because there's an allied outpost there with the Terrans, and there's a lot of nice terrain to just sort of kite around. And on top of those stairs, the Terrans do eventually actually solve that by themselves as well, which you saw just back there. So that's a really nice spot to have vision of and to be able to stage an assault. I am using the Annihilators to do these long-range snipes. I think it's 3 or 4 snipes from an Annihilator to kill a Void Hand, which is excellent. And I have to deal with this Thrasher again. This time, I've got more carriers because I haven't lost a bunch to the Vipers. And it turns out when you have more stuff, things are easier. I'm teaching you really big lessons now, I know, but it's true. When you have more units, it's easier to fight. I just didn't micro that carrier away, and I don't know why, so that's another loss. And you can see I have no Vespene gas. None. Zilch, zero, nada. No Vespene gas, and that is so rough. That means I can't rebuild carriers. The only stuff I can build right now is the Sentinels. And as they're an excellent unit, they have a revive, they have a little charge, they're decent damage, they're quite bulky considering they have 2 lives as well. And they're great and all, but they don't win these fights, not in the small numbers I can afford them in. So I have nearly no room for error. However, I am able to push up the center. I get another crystal down, which is excellent. I've now got way more vision, which is nice, but also that corruption area is removed, and quite soon that's going to be another outpost for my allies, which gives me more of a buffer. Now, with this Annihilator, I was trying to get the active to shoot the corruption crystal. It just does not quite reach at that angle. You'll see that when I get vision, I'm going to try and shoot it, and I can't. I think I'm going to try and get vision with the carrier here. What am I doing? Yeah, so I try and get vision with the carrier, or am I too scared of the Vipers? I don't remember this bit exactly. Too busy getting attacked to to think properly. I don't think I did go for that in the end, but I'm telling you that I do try to use the cannons to shoot from there to that Void Crystal. It just does not reach. It's like, it must be less than 10 pixels away. It's not much. It is so close. It is right on the edges. You were able to see before I was able to shoot the Void Hands, but that crystal I just cannot. And right now I'm just stuck playing Thrasher duty. As you can see by the clock that's on the upper right of my mini-map, I'm an hour in, and it looks like I have about half the map, but the second half is a lot harder to take. I promise you that. The next thing I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try and use the Annihilator to push up on the Zerg side a little bit. Or is that the Terran bit? I think that's the Zerg bit that I'm pushing on. Now, the enemies that lurk in these areas, the Guardians, they sort of have a leash. You can sort of pull them away, and as long as they're not actively fighting, if they're just chasing, if they're not actually shooting, they will move back to their original positions, and their aggro range isn't actually that big until something takes damage. So as you can see with that Annihilator, I'm just going right on the edge. I'm going do-do-do-do-do-do-do to damage the Voidal Hand, and then from there, I can retreat and not lose anything while still damaging the hands, and that's great. That's great. I can make these little bits of progress. Now, the name of the game is using these carriers to trade efficiently. I'm trying to not lose anything. Carriers are incredibly powerful in the campaign, and I'm trying to use my Annihilator to harass while not losing it. And unfortunately, I've aggroed a bunch of stuff way out of position, which, yeah, I barely get away, I think. Yeah, I just barely get away. The carriers come in, and no, I still lose the Annihilator. The carriers do have these little repair drones tied to them, which is helpful, but it wasn't enough, and whilst losing an Annihilator doesn't sound like that big a deal, I don't have money! I can't do anything! And without money, I'm really not sure what I'm supposed to do. However, carriers do very well against the Void Thrashers because they're bulky, and it just doesn't hurt me that much, honestly. So now I bring the carriers back to defend from these attack waves. You might think that taking the left side is good to help deal with the attack waves, but they just end up getting overwhelmed and it's too much to defend. It's much easier to push up on the Zerg side and let them rebuild, because they can, even if they're left with just a couple of things, the Zerg side will still rebuild all the way up to wherever the game has checkpointed them, for want of a better term. I have all the blade dudes, and I'm going to actually use them to make an assault. I will lose a few, that's a given, but I wanted to make this push in order to secure ground for the Zerg side, and that gives me a really nice buffer if shit goes wrong, because, well, when shit goes wrong, you really need that buffer. A Void Thrasher can just shit on you really, really quickly. Now, there is one caveat to pushing up, and that is that sometimes Void Thrashers can, like, when they summon dudes, they can actually build up a critical mass, and the little pitiful trickle of reinforcements that your dudes get just doesn't deal with their death ball of garbage, and that can be very difficult. But it's still better to gain ground than to not overall. So the carriers do pick off the Void Thrasher, which is nice, and progress is being made. There is progress being made. But the thing is, am I ever going to be able to break through at the end? Will I be able to get the money to do so? Who fucking knows? Fortunately, I'm not losing much base and infrastructure, which is very nice. So these carriers are building up to their critical mass. And it's at this point that I decide to start going aggro on the left side. And you will see that this isn't inherently the best idea. The first area being clear is actually quite nice, because you do get vision on the areas you clear, and that's a really, really big deal, because that gets to alert you of when stuff's coming, and it gives you more time to respond with micro, and I'm not the best at micro, I'm going to be completely blunt. Now, I've pushed up notably on the left side, and this seems really good. This seems really good. It's like, oh, you know what? These assaults on the left side are really annoying. Wow, I wish there was something to help me with that. So why not get a base that will produce extra dudes and help me out in that regard? That's going to be really great. And so that's what I did. We'll see how that pans out. As of right now, of course, I'm dealing with yet more garbage, because that's what this mission throws you. It's just a constant stream of garbage on both sides. Such a great mission, but without powers, yeah, there's just a lot of garbage, and yeah, just look at what's happening on the left side, bro. They're just getting chunked. And I've got carriers there, and I was thinking, oh, carriers will defend this just fine. And sure, I guess, they're kind of doing that, but it just... If they lose enough stuff on that base that I've just collected on the left, they won't rebuild. And then I've just permanently lost support, and that makes the rest of the mission harder. And it's pretty clear that you can make it through the early game if you play it well enough. But if you don't have enough support in the late game, you might not be able to crack that final area, because that final area is a bunch of Void Hands that will continuously come back. Like, Narud actually keeps on summoning the Void Hands around his little corner of shittery. And so you need shit to help you break all of that. So we'll see what happens to that left base eventually. I am making a very nice push with carriers now. It's best to combine it with pushes from allies, because then they take the shit. Now this is a really nice one, because it makes the Terrans advance towards the middle, and that's really nice. Again, it's more shit, but it's so far up that I will get to see when stuff is a problem, and they will always try and build bunkers and station some dudes there. I am aware this is a long video, and I'm speeding this section up to a whopping 400%, and that's just because there's not much interesting happening in this particular section, but at least you get to see what happens, I suppose. It could be a shorter video. I suppose I could just say yes or no, is it possible? But obviously that's not going to be a very good video if it's just 3 seconds of asking the question and me going yes or no. So, no, I'm not going to do that. But it is... I don't know how I can emphasize just how ridiculously difficult it is to do this without powers, how spot on you need to be just because you don't have money. Now, there is a huge advantage of where the Zerg currently is on the right side here, and that is that they will actually start to sometimes hit those Void Hands. It's RNG based for sure, but they will actually do some of it of their own impact. I don't need to actually do anything. Now, of course, I will come in and take some shots with a carrier, because why not? I will take some damage where I can get it. But a big advantage of taking the right side is they will spawn Mutalisks, and Mutalisks do have bouncing shots. So, excuse me. So they'll shoot, it'll bounce on a bunch of stuff, which is pretty good, but the biggest advantage is that that will sometimes hit a Void Hand, and even if it's just a tiny bit of damage, eventually they will break through it on their own. I sniped one with a carrier to stop some of the tide of garbage coming at me, which is nice. But after a certain point, you can actually ignore the Zerg side for a while, because those Mutalisks, very slowly, admittedly, it won't happen on every wave, it needs to line up, and, you know, the waves from the previous areas need to line up, but they will do it, and that saves me some effort, which means I can focus on other areas. Or I can distract the enemy, and the Mutalisks can get some chip damage in, and so on and so forth. Whereas the humans don't have that benefit. Now, my carriers are holding the left side, so I am still getting some dudes coming up there. And at this point you might be asking, why not build a base right there? Why not start harvesting some Vespene gas and some minerals? You require more Vespene gas. The Void Thrasher will aggro it, and it will be very hard to defend without losing stuff, and it is simply not worth it yet. It just doesn't work. It is possible, probably, to start microing probes to start picking up little bits of the minerals and bringing them back, but it takes so long, and I think it's just better to micro the units. Now, for this next section, I'm trying to push up even further on the right side. You won't get more Zerg base for a little while, because there's just a lot of garbage in the way, but there are reasonably easily snipeable Void Hands here, as you can see. There's not too much threatening me, I'm not likely to lose the carrier, and so I can chip down these hands, and it will still reduce the amount of garbage being thrown at the Zerg, which is, of course, nice. It's an area where it's really great to use carriers, and as a gentle reminder, I can't go around the outside because they have absolutely shitloads of air-to-air and stuff around the edges that will just brutalize me in a heartbeat if I go anywhere that's not pretty damn close to the landmass. So I can't just fly around the edge as much as that seems like it would be a good idea. Yet another Void Thrasher. It is a fun little game. How many Void Thrashers do you think will be spawned before I win? Or come to the end and realize I lose? How many do you think it will get spawned? You can count them if you want. It's... Spoiler alert, regardless of result, it's a lot. It's a lot! There's a lot of Void Thrashers, man! There's a lot of Void Thrashers! But regardless, I continue pushing up. It's so easy to get just a little bit of chip damage, and so easy to back off safely. It's really a nice... The terrain here works out really nicely, and there's not that much stuff that the enemy has. I see an opportunity, while Kerrigan goes in like an idiot and gets glacked, I get to take down a Void Hand, which is totally worth. Nice job, Kerrigan. Thumbs up. Thank you for making space for me. That's really awesome of you. You're so kind to me. Now... It's just so slow progress. It's just so slow. It's not fast at all. The Void Hands, they can take down so many, but there's still so much other drivel just in the way. really annoying. But now that the Zerg's pushed up enough, there's such a long time to start poking down Void Thrashers that they become relatively easy as long as they don't reach that critical mass that I mentioned before. And of course I'm going to bring more carriers over to secure the Void Thrasher's death before he can reach that critical mass, because right here you can see starting to build up, and it just reaches a point where there's so many that whatever units go against them just die. Just walk up and like, haha, I'm gonna murder, we're going to fight to the death. They just get absolutely ruined. And so I use the carriers to either hit the Void Thrasher or to take out the forces to thin them out. Both work. They're kind of the same, honestly. As long as... I'd say thinning out the forces is probably better, actually, for the most part, because then you can't get overwhelmed. Whereas the Void Thrasher, even if you kill it, there might just be an unstoppable set of garbage. And I am holding that left base, and the left base does help the humans push up and hold off the garbage, and it means that shit's not hitting my base, which is really nice. I like it when it's not my base that's being attacked. You guys deal with it for me. Now, given I've talked so much about the strategy and whatnot at this point, and the difficulties that are faced, there's really not much to say, and so from here, I'm going to play a much sped up version of the game footage so that you can see how things were done, but you understand the gist by now. I respect viewer intelligence too much to explain, oh, I'm chipping down Void Hands for the 50th time. I'm pretty sure you can figure that out. And so from here you can see what the actual gameplay is, and when we reach a point where I can talk about how to try and finish the mission, then you'll get my lovely, annoying voice once again. I will cut in here to say at this point, this is where money really starts to run dry, and I couldn't even make a full army by the end. You'll see very, very soon. And now we come towards the very, very end. Money is tight. There are minerals left, but Vespene gas? Vespene gas? Not enough. Not enough. There's just a chunk of time where I'm completely AFK here. That's because I'm just waiting for money to come in and dudes to be trained, and I don't even have enough. You'll see I don't have enough to make 200 population cap. It's just not doable. And now, at last, we come to the closing moments. We come to the point when we find out if what I've done is enough to secure a win for me. I've still got minerals coming in. There's not an ounce of Vespene gas left on the map. There's nothing. No more Vespene gas. As a result, my best odds is to spend all my minerals on dudes. I can't remember what they're called offhand now, the little blade dudes. I cannot remember what they're called for my life. But either way, they don't cost gas, so I'm going to invest in those. And I'm taking no risks. I'm going to get, I actually can get up to 200 population, I lied before, but I meant I can't get 200 population of real units. I don't think the generic basic infantry unit quite counts as full army units, bluntly. They're useful though, don't get me wrong, they're not going to be bad, but it's not the same as more carriers, or immortals, or any such powerful units. As you can see, I'm 4 hours deep. 4 hours and 17 minutes, 40 seconds. Yeah. Very, very deep. Now, I can't lose at this point, right? Let's be clear. It's impossible to lose. I cannot lose. But can I win? Those are two very different things. Or I'm going to be stuck here staring at each other forever. I'm even making extra gateways in order to produce more... I can't remember what they're called. More of the basic infantry unit. Whatever the fuck that thing is called. I can't remember it in my life, bro. But just to get those into the fight quicker, so that I can send them in mid-fight. The plan is to just start producing them immediately once the fight begins, and as units die, those will spawn, come out, and hopefully keep the assault on until Narud goes down. Because if I fail this assault, I have to start again and somehow have a better army. Like, maybe I just don't lose any immortals and any carriers. Maybe that won't even be enough. But if I want to have a chance of winning it now, that's the way it has to be. I have to put everything into it now and make sure that any extra backups are there ASAP. Now, I'm maxing out on the preparations of these units, and I've set the spawn point to by Narud. So as they come out, they will sprint all the way there and hopefully swing the tide. And here I go. Now is the time. I gather all of my dudes. I've spent so long, so efficiently grinding out the map. I haven't lost that much. I've harvested every ounce possible, pretty much. And now all I can do is send in my big ball of doom and hope it's enough without powers. Because Narud is strong, man. He is strong. And those void hands come up. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to wait for the right moment. But it's just not coming, so I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to go for it, try and take everything out possible, and the massacre, the wave of garbage! Everything's charging in like an absolute motherfucker. I take out all the hands, and then I'm going to charge at all the dudes, and lastly, Narud, the absolute bitch. And then there's just like 50 of those dudes flying around. What the fuck? But it doesn't matter. It turns out that I've got more than enough garbage to overwhelm him. Sorry, Narud. But Carrier has arrived. The battle is won. And so, I can confirm, after many hours of grinding, and this mission alone, this one took 4.5 hours, but after probably about 7 hours of gameplay or so, I can confirm that the mission Into the Void for Starcraft 2 is fully beatable without using Spear of ADUN powers. That was a very, very, very hard challenge. I'll be completely honest with you. That was a very, very, very hard challenge. But it is possible. And there's a surprising amount of leeway, but it's slow, it's painful, and it's grindy. Here we go, victory screen. Yeah, 4 hours, 20 minutes. So many Void Thrashers spawned, bro. Yep, that was, one hell of a challenge.